Hi, I'm Big Mike. Welcome to My History of Comics. This is a video series about my comic book collecting and comic book reading. It's not about the actual history of the medium or any of the characters, creators, or genres therein. Why am I doing this? Well, there aren't too many people I know that collect comics. My friends and family generally don't. So, I decided I'd take this to YouTube and see what happened. When I say collect comics, I don't mean put them in a bag and a board and save them. I mean read them and keep them, reread them, etc. So, this first video, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how I came to comics and where I am today. So, when I was a kid, I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. There were a ton of superheroes on TV, and I came to comics through superheroes. So, there was the Batman TV show from the 60s. There was the Wonder Woman TV show, the Incredible Hulk TV show, and a whole ton of cartoons. Not really the best ones, but we watched what we had. So we had Super Friends, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, the Incredible Hulk, Fantastic Four, etc. The Incredible Hulk live-action show starring Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno was my favorite. The greatest moment of anticipation I remember experiencing as a kid was when, in the episode, Bill Bixby playing David Banner was injured or upset and his eyes would be covered and he'd be struggling and thrashing about, and then all of a sudden he'd open his eyes and they'd be all white and you knew he was about to turn into the Hulk. They'd play that scary music, doom, and pretty soon he'd stretch out of most of his clothes except his pants, of course, and Lou Ferrigno would come growling at the bad guys and generally breaking through walls, pushing things aside, throwing things, and occasionally throwing the bad guys. Anyway, as a kid, that's what I loved. I think a lot of the appeal was the fact that the Hulk was a little bit scary, and kids generally gravitate towards things that push them just a little bit, kind of almost to see if they could handle it. And in fact, the Hulk was my favorite cartoon character, comic book character. I had the toy from Mego, and I actually also had the Batman and Robin Mego toys because I loved the Adam West series so much. Comics were in the house occasionally. My mom would buy them sometimes. That came to an end one day. She bought a Spider-Man comic for my older sister, a Hulk comic for me, and a Fantastic Four comic for us to share. About 30 seconds later, that Fantastic Four comic was ripped in half. My sister and I were crying, and my mom said no more comics. So I didn't really get to buy comics until I could afford it with my allowance and paper route money. What sparked my interest, though, was, as with many kids from my generation, the Batman movie from 1989. It was this huge sensation. Tim Burton directed, Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson starring, and Batman was everywhere. On clothes, on every product you can think of. And the movie itself, it was pretty exciting. It was this dark, serious version of Batman to us, a million miles away from the Adam West show. And as you're getting into adolescence, you want things to be more serious. And so, again, we saw the movie, we all loved it. And I went looking for Batman comics that kind of reflected that tone. I found the first part of the series, the story rather, in Batman called Dark Knight, Dark City, written by Peter Milligan, drawn by Kieran Dwyer, with these amazing Mike Mignola covers. Mike Mignola would later create Hellboy. Just this shadow-wrapped Batman leaping toward a gargoyle that was very exquisitely rendered, with a lot of spot blacks in it. Peter Milligan's story was pretty twisted. Batman had to battle the Riddler, who was possessed by a demon, and put him in a situation where he had to give mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to a man who was hanged, and dislodge a ping-pong ball from a baby's throat via tracheotomy, which was kind of freaky. So I read the 3 parts of the story. I liked it, but it didn't encourage me to get any more comics. The story was done. I'd had my fill of the serious Batman, at least for the moment. And so, I went to the local convenience store, spun the spinner rack, looked at the covers. Not a whole lot jumped out at me, and then I saw the cover. Now, let me back up a little bit. The Hulk was my favorite character. One day in 6th grade, I was supposed to be learning math. I wasn't. I was in another classroom and I found a comic book in a desk. And the Hulk was great? What? And he could speak pretty much coherently? No, that's not the real Hulk. The real Hulk is big and green and grunts and yells and says Hulk smash and things like that. So that was my first moment of fanboy entitled rage. At the spinner rack, I saw the cover to Incredible Hulk number 372, where this green Hulk, he was back. He was bursting through this face that was half Banner, half Great Hulk, and his eyes were all white, made it look like he was insanely angry, and he was like reaching out toward the reader to grab him. I had to read it. I took it home. I thumbed through it. It introduced me to, in one issue, Betty Ross, who was Banner's estranged wife, Bruce Banner, since it was the comics, a new villain called Prometheus, who would later become not so villainous, but you didn't know that at the time, and the Hulk's current status quo, pretty typically wandering around the country. And there was epic action, and Dale Keown's art was fantastic. He drew the biggest, most muscular Hulk I'd ever seen. It was actually Peter David's writing on that issue that kept me interested, though. I'm kind of mystified even now that me as an 11-year-old really responded to the emotional through line of Banner and his wife reuniting. I had to see what happened next, so I went to the comic book store, got the next issue, even though it featured that gray Hulk, which I came to actually really like as a character. And I went back and said, when's the next one coming out? And they said, 3 or 4 weeks, whatever. So I started looking around. I recognized the X-Men from the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends cartoon show in which they guest starred, and looked at the current issue, which was part 1 of 9, and I knew I couldn't buy 9 X-Men comics on my allowance. So I started looking through the back issue bins, and there was this really cool cover in this X-Men reprint. Oh, the recent issues were going for $5-10 a piece. No way I could afford that. But in this classic X-Men reprint, there was this yellow and red cover. The entire team was done up in yellow and red. The line art, if I remember right, had been kind of removed, so it looked like they were made of fire. It was really cool. Steve Littell, who later drew the Legion of Superheroes, did a great job on that cover. So I bought it. It was part 2 of the Claremont and Byrne, Terry Austin inked Dark Phoenix saga, still considered the best X-Men comic of all time in a lot of circles. And Byrne's art was very clear and clean, and the action was well done. And Chris Claremont's writing introduced me to all the characters. I could tell their powers, their motivations, and I wanted to see more. This was great stuff, so I started collecting classic X-Men, bought up the entire Dark Phoenix saga, which, you start X-Men at the top. I don't know where you're going to go from there, but I was soon buying the regular title with the Jim Lee art. And I continued reading Marvel for a while. And then the most popular artists at the time at Marvel, Jim Lee, Mark Silvestri, Todd McFarlane, who drew Spider-Man, Whilce Portacio, Rob Liefeld, Eric Larson, and Jim Valentino formed their own company called Image Comics, and that was so exciting. New characters, new heroes. Let's see what these artists could do unleashed. And it turned out to be pretty much fight scenes after fight scenes after fight scenes. Which, was fun when I was 14, but I soon grew tired of it and wanted to see what else was out there. Branched out to DC a little bit. Mark Waid's Flash and later Impulse were probably my favorites at the time. And eventually I discovered Vertigo Comics. Sandman was the greatest comic ever, according to all the people at the comic shop, so I had to try that. And there was this one shot called Absolute Vertigo that had a preview of this new series that was coming out called Preacher, which had swearing and violence and looked, a lot more adult than the fare I was used to. So from Vertigo books, I soon branched out to some independent comics. Stray Bullets and the works of Evan Dorkin, like Milk and Cheese and Dork, were my favorites at the time. And I've since read and collected a whole variety of comics, and that's where I am today. So, what is it about comics? I like the words and the pictures combined. Some of the writing isn't so good, which you can kind of forgive if the art's good a lot of times. But there have been some excellent writers. there have been some excellent artists, and the sheer breadth of art styles and skill and variety of the artistry of books on comics, from the classic stuff by Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, Jack Cole, Alex Toth, etc., to some of the modern artists, J.H. Williams III, for example, with his experimental panel layouts and very nice brushstroke rendering. Just always something that's appealed to me. So, what I'm going to do from here on out is devote each video to one particular artist, writer, story, series, or character, and just talk about how that particular thing has influenced how I read, and talk a little bit about what I like from them. So if you like what you see, feel free to leave a comment. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me in the future.